So you're really relying on all these digital elements to convince someone that you're the product to buy versus someone else's. And I think all of those elements, and when I say all, I mean the entire digital experience from when they clicked on an ad to when they get their confirmation email that they have a purchase. I think every touch point and every interaction in there is your brand. There really isn't anything that in that entire journey that I would not consider a brand element.
Brands spend thousands of dollars to get customers onto their website only to lose the sale because the website just didn't make sense. So much of the buying journey is on the website, and yet not all websites are helpful. What are the principles that make a great website? Well, we dig into those details in today's episode. Welcome to How to Market Your D2C Brand, a show where we interview founders and marketers in the D2C space to learn about how they have grown their brands and current best practices in marketing. This show is brought to you by Goodo Studios, a photo and video creation studio that works with consumer brands to make content that converts viewers into customers. And I'm your host, Matthew Gutozzi. Today's guest is Shaun Brandt, co-founder of Oddit, whose mission is to offer simple solutions for direct-to-consumer brands looking to boost conversion as well as strengthen brand loyalty. I wanted to start off the interview by understanding what are some of the major shifts brands have made with websites in the past 3 years.
In the last 3 years, I would say the biggest shift in focus has been we're seeing a lot more D2C brands that are, rather than just taking a Shopify template and just inputting, boilerplate content, images, and just pushing live. We're seeing a lot more of them invest in brand. And that's not to say that that doesn't still happen. I think, and there's nothing wrong with that. There's tons of D2C brands out there that are doing that. But I think we're seeing a lot more invest in brand from a storytelling standpoint, photography standpoint, just really tightening the screws on all those elements. And honestly, it's taking a lot of notions from retail and how they approach brand. Getting optics on your product on a shelf requires really nailing all of these different facets, including a customer knowing or hearing about the brand before they even got there. And I think you're seeing D2C brands adopt a lot of that same mentality and in dialing in every of those little touch points across a brand experience.
So when you talk about brand, I think that's always a word that's thrown around, but can be vague in a lot of ways. So could you explain a little bit more about, how D2C brands are looking at branding? You mentioned photography. You mentioned like, is it copywriting? Like, what about it is brand for a website specifically?
Yeah, I think the ones that do it best really position themselves to have a unique story. And I think when it comes to brand in a D2C site, it really is every element that you're seeing down to is the cart icon designed specifically for them or is it something off the shelf? And there's no right or wrong answer. I'm more so just kind of giving context around how far the details can go on these things. At the end of the day, the brand from a D2C side, because unlike in retail, the only thing the user can interact with is this interface and these images and this copywriting before they hit purchase, right? They can't pick it up, they can't feel it, they can't see is the cardboard packaging high quality, low quality, all these things. So you're really relying on all these digital elements to convince someone that you're the product to buy versus someone else's. And I think all of those elements, and when I say all, I mean the entire digital experience from when they clicked on an ad to when they get their confirmation email that they have a purchase. I think every touch point and every interaction in there is your brand. There really isn't anything that in that entire journey that I would not consider a brand element.
You can obviously customize everything down to the shopping cart icon, but what are the 3 or 4 most important elements for a D2C website's homepage?
I think one of the main things that we're constantly recommending, the first thing is just building trust with new users. So a lot of brands, and we find this mostly with brands that have maybe a longer track record or a bigger presence, they tend to forget to tell people what they do. So they'll just start selling you something or offering up something, hey, shop now, but they're not actually telling you what they do and why they're better than everyone else or what their competitive advantage is. A lot of the smaller brands do a better job of doing that because they're just trying to enter the space, and they're trying to make a name for themselves. But I think probably the biggest thing that a lot of brands forget is they'll surface like, hey, Boxing Day sale or whatever offer they have, and they'll forget to just say, hey, here's why we're great. The second thing is building trust with new users is some form of social proof. So whether that's like a good piece of press or like a solid review, pulling in those references to other people that love the product, it's it's equivalent of a family member saying, hey, you got to try this, right? It's kind of the new word of mouth, or a version of word of mouth. And other users or new users seeing that with a product tells them, okay, I'm not the first person to buy this. And obviously, in every case, they know they're probably not the first person to buy it, but seeing it and being put at ease that someone else has tried it and it worked, or tried it and it wasn't crap, all these different things play into building trust with a customer. And we have a lot of customers with Oddit that come in and they're like, well, we don't have a lot of reviews. How do we do that? And I think, not having a lot of reviews is an excuse. I think everyone has a presence in some form. If you've launched the product yesterday, I guarantee someone has tried it. There's no harm in calling them on the phone and saying, what did you think? Typing that out for them and putting it on your website. There's no excuse to not have one review on your site or some form of social proof. It can be as simple as going into tagged images on Instagram and saying, okay, what did this person say? Convert that to a review, shoot them a DM, let them know you're doing it. Like, there really is zero excuses to not have reviews, even if it's your first day.
How do you balance creating like what's a good flow for the customer while also thinking about the brand and the story long term?
It's a very, very fine line you have to walk. I think there's a ton of brands out there that get a lot of press and attention that do a really good job on the brand side. They're very sexy. The websites are really fun, and they probably do have a really shitty conversion. And then there's brands that are really ugly and cumbersome, and they feel like they're just every 2 seconds you got an app pop up or a widget, and they probably convert really well. And there's a middle ground there where you can kind of do both. But there's an argument for the other end of the spectrum as well. Like, a site that's overly branded and really low in traditional, like, quantitative conversion type elements, they have a lot of those have such a strong brand presence that the customer just doesn't care. They're just so excited about being a part of this culture that this brand has created, that it almost just gets to look past all these traditional, like, what converts better. And that's really hard to explain to customers, and it's also hard to implement or identify what is and isn't going to work. But I think the main thing is just giving, at the end of the day, when it comes to conversion, it's giving a customer a really clear path to a purchase, educating them on the product, making sure that they clearly understand what they're buying, how much it is, all the different elements when you're making a purchase that you need to understand before you give them your credit card. As long as that purchase journey is really crystal clear as to why they should believe in your brand, what the product they're purchasing is, how much is it, all the different elements that are kind of just like par for the course. As long as those are clear, you can really get as crazy as you want with the brand. You just can't completely forget about having just like a simple flow of information. That's at the end of the day.
From the outside looking in, I don't understand what makes one person better than another when it comes to conversion rate optimization. Are there principles to Crow? I'm not really sure. So I wanted to get to the core of what makes Shaun and Oddit's approach to Crow different than other experts in this space.
What we've been calling it is brand first CRO. So when we say brand first CRO, we're really targeting long-term CRO. So when a customer comes to us and they're an Amazon reseller, they've popped up a template site and they're just like, we just need to make more money. What do we do? We actually refund them, and we don't do it because the implementations that we're going to be recommending, they're about building a better brand story into their site. The recommendations we make are very specific to the product, to the brand, to the actual company that we're auditing. It has nothing to do with necessarily best practices for a product page. It's best practices for a product page blended with what's the story they're trying to communicate, what is their price point, what is their AOV. And a lot of those different factors in their product specifically dictate the recommendations we're making of how much info is above the add to cart, how much is below, all these different things. They're very, very brand specific. And to be honest, a lot of them you're not going to implement and see the change the next day. A lot of them are about building a better brand story that creates a more trustworthy brand. I think those types of elements they take time, and over time you're going to see more word of mouth traction, you're going to see more chatter about the brand. You're naturally going to see conversion go up because it's a better site experience. But there's nothing that we're recommending that's like, hey, add this widget because we find that it goes conversion increases 1%. Like we've done hundreds of them now. I've never once recommended a widget or anything that's like, hey, go grab this off the shelf. It's just not our approach. And that's not to say that there's anything wrong with a lot of the more quantitative CRO options that are more about, hey, let's A/B test this. No matter what it looks like, whatever works better is better. There's merit there. It's just not our approach. And like every D2C brand, because we're one ourselves, we're trying to find our position in the market and make sure that it's unique. And there's D2C brands that agree with that, and there's ones that don't, and that's totally okay.
What are some things that brands should be thinking about in terms of improving on kind of their, maybe it's trends that you see for 2022?
The main thing that we're commenting on constantly that it's not a new thing for this year. It's honestly, it's something that's should have been a focus the last decade, but for some reason people just still aren't doing it, is mobile accessibility. I would say we get mobile desktop statistics for every customer of ours. I would say the average Oddit customer, their mobile traffic is around 75% of general traffic. When it comes to traffic for purchasing, it's much more balanced. So a lot of customers on and I'm sure a lot of DC brands are seeing this. A person shopping on Instagram, they click an ad, they're checking out the product on their phone, and then when it comes to putting in a credit card, a lot of customers still go to a desktop and purchase. It's just easier, more comfortable, whatever it is. So we're always looking at both, but from a mobile perspective, we're still seeing so many customers that, buttons are like tiny or low fidelity, or they're not at the bottom of the screen where someone's hands are, right? Like if on a phone, my hands are always on the bottom, and they're constantly putting these primary actions either in the middle of a fold of a section or in, their navigation on the top. There's all these different elements of interacting with your site that the more accessible and the easier they are to reach for someone, unfortunately, people are just innately lazy. They're sitting on a cell phone on their couch or wherever. They don't, just like getting up or, moving your thumbs is the same thing. It's easier to just tap than it is to reach up. So the more accessible that actions are on a mobile device, the more clicks they're going to get, regardless of what the button is, what your product is. That's something that's just the data speaks for itself. I would say that's one of the main things that we're still seeing is people just they're using small buttons, and I don't really understand it. They should be full width. They should be near the bottom of the page or the bottom of the fold. So for each cross section, one of the other trends that I think is interesting going on the same kind of path is Safari moving its, I guess, browser or URL tab bar to the bottom. That's kind of been a long time coming, in my opinion. I think you're going to see pretty much everything shift to the bottom, not desktop probably, but anything mobile. I think we're going to see a transition where websites are flipped on their heads completely and everyone's going to be surfing from the bottom of the site instead of the top. So I think we're going to see a major shift in placing navigations at the bottom of the page. It's not something we've been recommending a ton with Oddit just because it's not an easy thing to implement until Shopify starts providing more themes that offer that. And we don't want to force customers into something that's really hard to do. But I think that general accessibility of elements is huge. And then also in the accessibility vein is just color contrast and color choices. So, we have so many customers that come in and they're like, think something's not working, and they've got white text on like a baby blue button. And it's like, well, there's an accessibility standard of obviously it needs to be easy to see, but so much of it is just common sense. Like test other colors on the button and just put them side by side. Which one's easier to see? You don't need to be a designer to have judgment on those types of things. So I think that's one of the other things that I would say to a lot of brands is, changing the colors of text or buttons is something that you can do in, I mean, unless your site's completely custom from scratch, anyone can do. You don't need development experience or a CRO person. Just go in and test 6 different versions of it and see which one is easier to read or easier to catch your attention. Those simple changes can have a gigantic difference, and they really aren't. You can A/B test them all day. At the end of the day, it's a matter of which one is easiest to read for a user and which one is stopping them from scrolling because it's easy to scan. So when they're going through that your page and scrolling, and it's a primary action, let's say like going to a product page, is it easy to read? And from a color contrast standpoint, so many users have their screen dim or their screen brightness turned down, right? Because they're saving their battery. So the contrast is so important, right? Like white on black or black on white is obviously the biggest, but like as high contrast as possible is so important. It's more important than even the button being full width or big or whatever, because if they can't read it, they don't know it's there.
Are there other kind of consumer behaviors trends that you notice that actually affect how you or think about how you design a website?
As overarching like consumer trends, there's not a ton. We deal with so many specific industries that every user group's a little bit different. I would say that the one that keeps coming up and people keep asking about, or there's conversation about, and there's very polarizing opinions on, is mobile versus desktop, and the view that desktop is dead. And I think there's definitely an argument that could be made to never focus on desktop anymore and only focus on mobile. But at the end of the day, we've went through over 600 D2C sites now, and every one of them has at least 25% desktop traffic. And that number goes up when it comes to converting like an actual purchase, right? So when whatever out of 100 sales, that number's higher in desktop for actually putting in the credit card. So I think that's one of the main things that I would say is, regardless of the fact that you're designing your site mobile first or your experience mobile first, totally agree with that. You're not going to hear us argue about that. But to say that desktop is dead and you should forget about it is ridiculous to me. I can't stand that argument, because all you're saying to me is that you don't give a shit about 25% of the people coming to your site, or 25% of the people purchasing your product, which I would love to hear a D2C brand owner tell me that they don't care about 25% of their orders. Not to mention, I think that the edits you make on a desktop site versus mobile, they're easier changes to make. You have much more canvas to work with. So arranging elements, all these different decisions that a UX designer has to deal with, they're a lot easier on a desktop than they are on a mobile, because you have a larger canvas. So making those changes and keeping them consistent, it's less effort, it's not as costly for a developer. All these different elements that stack up to keeping a desktop experience at a certain level, they're not the same as on mobile. So I think the excuse of saying like we're just doing it because we're focusing on mobile is bullshit. I think you're just being lazy.
What are brands that have some great websites? Maybe it could be desktop and mobile, however you want to break it down, but just brands that have great websites, and why are they great?
I'm sure you saw this stat Shopify posted in the last month, but it was like 1 I think in 2020 there was 1.3 million stores live, and now there's 3.6 over 1 year. Like there's just it's insane the growth that's happening. So there's so many to look at, and I feel like I see 20 new ones every day. Um, the ones that always still draw my attention are the ones that are whether they're succeeding or failing, they're trying really really hard and putting in a very um, valiant effort on that fine line between brand and more traditional CRO. They're really focused on the details and building a positive brand experience for customers. I think one of the really interesting ones that I love from a site experience standpoint that's probably not perfectly dialed in for CRO is OCCO, which is a spice startup. I think one of my favorite D2C brands, just in general, from a concept execution and purchase everything, is Homesick Candles. I love that brand. I think in terms of like new brands that have popped up, I think it's Grazia or Grazi. Yeah, like that one's kind of been they've been pushing a ton, I can tell on their influencer side and everything, and you're seeing more of it pop up. But I think I just love brands that are approaching something so classic like that in a way that, they're just making a product that's been poured out of a glass bottle for so damn long. And it's obviously, every chef you see in a kitchen at a restaurant is squeezing it out of a squeeze bottle. The fact that no one's D2C'd it in a squeeze bottle yet is just blows my mind, but they've done it now. Um, but so I love stuff like that where they really don't need to have an amazing CRO experience because the product is so unique and simple in its own way that you're just going to sell it anyway in most cases.
What are some common mistakes brands are making when they first start out? And how can someone prevent that from happening?
One of the most common mistakes brands make is they really and you can feel this when I go and look at their site. I don't even need to speak to them to understand this, but you can kind of feel this I think pressure that brands have to over communicate and over explain what they do. I think that if you need to over explain it, one, someone probably should have never given you the funding. If it requires over explanation to explain your product, it's probably not going to go that far anyway. But in 99.9% of cases, there's a really easy way to explain what you do and a really simple way to explain what you do. And I think the hardest part for any brand owner or marketer is getting down to that pared down single sentence that tells a user exactly what it is in a way that they understand and they're willing to hit purchase. It may take a year to find that exact perfect statement, but I think simplifying that down into the simplest format for every product or service or whatever you're selling is really key. Cutting down that clutter, you know what I mean? Like when it comes to a product page, for instance, just cut the marketing fluff. Like, what am I getting? When am I getting it? Why is it valuable? Add to cart. There really is no like secret formula aside from just being really clear. The more confused, the more reading people have to do, the longer they're on site, the less chance they are that they're going to buy that thing. I think one of the main things that users always, that founders are always screwing up is when you think of a product page and there's a add to cart button wherever it is on the page, they tend to surround it with all of these different things, right? Like if you think of a product on a shelf in a store and all these signs pointing at it saying on sale, whatever. Like there's no time to even think about actually purchasing it because you're just so overwhelmed by all this other crap. And Shopify's actually done kind of a bad job of this, where they keep pushing add to cart buttons with these stupid credit card logos below it and stuff like this where there's just clutter everywhere. And it's like it's 2022. Everyone knows that if I hit add to cart, I'm probably going to have an option that makes sense for me. Like they probably don't take checks, but there's something in your wallet that brand, I guarantee, will let you process a payment. And if they don't, I sure if you email them and say I want to mail you a check, these brands want to make sales. They'll find a way to process your payment. So like I I don't understand why all these D2C brands keep cluttering primary action areas like that, where it's like the only thing a user needs to know is what that button does and maybe the price, right? Like on the button. If you're going to add anything that's going to like clutter that area, it should be something that adds a positive kind of like result to the actual purchase. So, you'll see a lot as an example. Let's say it's an add to cart button and someone below it says shipping and taxes calculated at checkout. It's like, that's fine, but why am I communicating something negative right below the most important action on my site? Like, just if you don't know what the shipping is going to be and you don't know what taxes are going to be, just don't say it. Don't say it till the end because you're slowing them down and making them think, oh fuck, I didn't think about duty, I didn't think about taxes, and now they're hesitating, right? You don't want that. So if you're going to surround it with anything, just make it something super simple and positive, like whatever, money back guarantee, or there's countless things, right? Made in America, like it can be anything about your brand that's saying, hey, before you hesitate about hitting add to cart, remember, you know, it's free shipping, or remember it's made in America, or remember it's completely organic and healthy and safe and whatever. But you know, the whole mentality of just putting stickers and you know all this shit everywhere to complicate that super important area of a conversion, I think is probably one of the biggest issues that we see in every site, almost every site.
So to finish off the podcast, we like to end with a few quick fire questions. And the first one is, what is a D2C brand that you think is awesome?
Be a very unpopular answer, but especially based on this last week. But I'm gonna say Peloton. I I I know their stock's down 30% this week, but I think that they're getting a bad rap because they didn't hit, projections because of COVID. But at the end of the day, I can't think of a D2C brand that has built such an unbelievable community around a physical product. Um, one that's a subscription base and one that has changed so many people's lives. And I think that they just really don't get enough credit now because they're a public company. They just get shit on. Um, but at the end of the day, it's an amazing product with an amazing community, and I think they've done a really good job.
What's a tech company, maybe a Shopify app or something like that in the D2C space that you've been a fan of lately?
We this might be a biased opinion because our cooling group actually invested in it, but the guys at Triple Whale are doing some really amazing things with helping brands get a better, visual on their attribution and just on their ad dollars. So I think that's one that's been really exciting, and I just honestly haven't heard a bad review. Anytime you see a product where the resounding feedback is, I don't understand how they do it so well, almost like that, it's too good to be true. I think a lot of the times it is too good to be true, but I think in their case, it's been really successful and it's not too good to be true, and they're doing a really good job. I think in terms of something that is more implementable by a founder and just kind of more like a plugin. I think I did mention this one on the that other podcast as well, but I think the Tolstoy app or anything like that, not necessarily Tolstoy, but anything that's chat based or communications based, support based, that's more video instead of texting, I think is super helpful. I think putting a face to the brand is really important. I think hearing someone explain the product is really important. We're actually launching a new site for Oddit next month. And one thing we've seen over the last year is that it's really hard for people to totally understand what an audit report is until they speak to someone. And so, obviously it's a unique product in that it's a service packaged as a report and it's a high AOV. But I think a lot of brands could benefit from actual human interaction with the customer, even if it's a recorded video explaining the product.
Love it. Yeah, I actually use Video Ask, which is also really great. Um, so to finish off the podcast, we like to do open mic, which is a chance for you to say whatever you want to say. You could give more advice. You could talk about something you believe in, a cause, whatever, an idea. Doesn't matter. This is just your chance to say whatever you want to say. So when you're ready, the floor and the mic is yours.
I think the one thing that I'd want to draw founders and D2C people towards is the community that we're working on right now. So at right now with Audit, even though our price point is reasonable for what you're getting, there's a lot of small D2C brands that just can't necessarily stomach a couple $1,000s to get a report of their entire site. So we're working on a product to actually cater to the customers that want more ongoing CRO insights and not necessarily fully designed mock-ups of their website. So we're planning to launch the Audit Club next month. We're launching the waitlist next week, and the real goal is to be surfacing like all of the brand first CRO kind of tactics that we use, a lot of education. It's going to be mostly D2C founders, kind of a place for people to talk about conversion and help each other, introduce apps that we all use or don't like, and really just help navigate the space in a way that's extremely helpful. It's going to be much more cost effective, obviously, than a report, kind of like a month type thing. But I think I would encourage users to lean on other D2C founders in the space. I think, regardless of whether it's in a community like ours or otherwise, I think Twitter has proven that the D2C space in particular is very, very helpful. I think that a lot of D2C brands, because there's so many launching right now, they're small teams, they're founder led. These are the people working on their brands day to day. They're not CEOs. I think that these people are very active and they're very willing to help because they also are asking for help. So I would, before you go spend a ton of money on all these things, I think there's a ton of people in social spaces and community that have a lot of the answers already if you're following the right people.
This conversation with Shaun helped me understand what brand focused Crow is, as well as how to think about developing a brand focused website. You can follow Shaun on Twitter at Brantify, as well as Oddit. We will put more information about Oddit linked in the show notes. Thank you, Shaun, for being on the show. If you like this show, drop a rating on Apple Podcasts or your podcast listening app. And if you really love this show, please share this episode with a friend, and thank you in advance.